Good morning, everyone. Lots going on as usual. And don't forget to join the mailing list. I send out a weekly newsletter. And if YouTube, for whatever reason, cuts me off, I will be able to get in touch with you, which is important. And also, don't forget to join the forums. CanadaPoly.com has forums, and we are busy discussing the finer points of... Yesterday, we got into the finer points of the attack on Christianity through the... Indigenous children mass grave thing, and why I think that the two are somewhat connected. And we'll end the show on the mass grave thing today. And also, I think that it's more attack on the foundations of the country, I think. Like more an attack on I compare it in this blog, on this, forum post to the toxic masculinity attack as well. It's another attack on the basic foundation of the country of Canada. That's what I think this is. And yeah, it was an interesting conversation. So join the conversation. Okay, let's get into it. This I came across yesterday. It's from 2017. Listen to how outraged the House is about this statement that Candace Bergen makes in the House. And it's very interesting. And here we go.
To quote, I'm sure the Prime Minister is very familiar, it's solutions to important problems are decided not by party committee but by one individual. Well, you know who said that? Chinese dictator Chairman Mao. Right. Well, you know what? Canada is not China. Canada is not a dictatorship. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is not the Supreme Emperor. So maybe he could do Canadians a favor, go take another vacation, and don't come back until he's ready to stop acting like those dictators.
Well, I mean, right? Don't mess with her, apparently. 2017, they're making comparisons to Chairman Mao in the House. Wow, wild, right? This is before I started my show. But in yesterday's New York Post, China is threatening nuclear war, expanding arsenal in case of intense showdown with the United States. Wild. The media mouthpiece for the Chinese Communist government touted the country's urgent goal to expand its arsenal of long-range nuclear missiles in anticipation of an intense showdown with the United States. As the U.S. strategic containment of China has increasingly intensified, I would like to remind again that we have plenty of urgent tasks, but among the most important ones is to rapidly increase the number of commissioned nuclear warheads and the DF-41s, the strategic missiles that are capable to strike long range and have high survivability in the Chinese arsenal. Wrote Hu Zhijian. Sorry if I got that wrong. I've probably got that really wrong. The editor of the Global Times. The number of Chinese nuclear warheads must reach the quantity that makes the U.S. elites shiver should they entertain the idea of engaging in military confrontation with China, he said in an opinion piece. On this basis, we can calmly and actively manage divergence with Washington to avoid a minor incident sparking a war. U.S. hostility towards China is burning. We must use our strength and consequences that Washington cannot afford to bear if it takes risky moves to keep them sober, Hu wrote, adding that Beijing must be ready for the intense showdown. The threat from the editor of the Global Times comes as President Biden orders the U.S. intelligence community to take another look at whether the coronavirus leaked from a Chinese lab. Now, I'll tell you, a quick show note and a little bit of warning. I'm doing an experiment today. I'm not going to cut the show up. I'm just going to put it all on YouTube, and only because I'm interested in because I'm going to talk about Fauci, but the Fauci emails are real, right? Like I was talking about this Facebook official, they're real. To some degree, and so now they can be talked about on YouTube, I guess, but this is more of an experiment than anything else, and it fits better here, etc. And so I'm not going to chop up the show today, but I think that it's interesting because if I was to talk about any of this previous to these emails being freedom of information, so this is a perfectly legal, and these emails are 100% legitimate, not leaked or tampered with by hackers or anything like that. They're released legally, and that's an important distinction to make, and that's what Alex is saying here. But before this, YouTube would have demonetized this show. So this is the experiment. I'm going to see if they're going to demonetize it, even if I talk about something that's real in the news. And I understand that everything that I talk about is, I try to show all my sources. It's all real. It's all in the news, right? But it doesn't matter to YouTube because they'll remove the monetization even if the New York Times is reporting that PCR tests are no good, right? Oh, my test. Okay. One important part of the Fauci emails is that they were freedom of information. That is, obtained completely legally and in a way that guarantees they're accurate. So the elite media can't say leak Russia hack unverified and try to ignore them. So this is a big story, right? Like the Fauci emails are a big story. Here's one. Turns out the whole asymptomatic spread thing was, this guy says, a lie. Who'd have thunk it, right? Here's the Fauci email that proves it. Kai, error in my statement to you. I meant to say that most transmissions occur from someone who is symptomatic, not asymptomatic. Really tired. Not much sleep these days, right? Trump bad, Orange Man bad, right? So that's an interesting thing. Dr. Fauci believes that masks were not really effective in keeping out virus. So what science are we supposed to follow then? The science that we threw out in 2020 because for some reason somebody said Fauci said masks were good. And I understand that Dr. Tam flip-flopped on masks multiple times, many, many times. It's very interesting. Here's Matt Walsh. He says 2 Fauci emails. In one, he says that masks are for sick people. In the other, he admits that asymptomatic spread is rare. So why were people with no symptoms wearing masks for a year? It's almost like it was all a charade. Charade? So the Fauci emails are a big deal. And I think that it's interesting that they're not a big deal, right? Like, splashed across the cover of most newspapers today is the Delta variant, the bad 90s band, the Delta variant, right? And that's what we're talking about, right? And schools remain closed. It's interesting because people are really, really done. At the news of the schools being kept closed, I take my kids swimming at 3:00 most days, right? And we've got friends of theirs that are around. So as the schools were closed, we had a pool party, right? Like, and it's like, okay, early summer this year, kids. This is insane. Like, and we're going to talk about the school closures as well. But at what point do you focus on? At what point does the government admit their error, right? At what point does the local health authorities admit their error? At what point is enough? Right, we're the most locked down jurisdiction in anywhere. BC has kids in schools, and with the proof now that we were taking cues from somebody who was super tired and got asymptomatic and symptomatic mixed up. That's an indication that maybe we got it wrong, right? Like, and if we got it wrong, we need to react fast in a way that makes sense, right? But no. But not in Canada. Not in Canada. In Canada, you get this. This is absolutely... There is speculation. People are saying like, well, this is a funny tweet. Trudeau describes the euphoria of getting a COVID vaccine, tells Canadians to shame their crusty uncles who resist into getting their shots. What a lunatic. Am I a crusty uncle? We had a pool party. Okay, here's Trudeau. So sorry, Trudeau warning. It's about a minute. Here we go. And just to underline, we're watching this to see about why Roberto is saying, what a lunatic. What a lunatic. It is. Like, watch. It's so crazy. Oh, hold on here. I was trying to make this big.
We're talking about how important it was for everyone to get vaccinated and what a big deal it was to get vaccinated. So I thought that was all built in already. Right. But getting that shot really was an amazing feeling. It hits you.
Did you cry?
I cry at I cry at movies. I didn't cry at the shot, but it was
the gossipy sounding like, oh my God, Becky, can you believe this? It's just grating. It's really grating. Do people talk like that? Like in real life, do people talk like that? It's hard to, and the affect, the facial affect, it's very stage. If you're on stage, you have to make your facial expressions like 2 or 3 times as big, right? In order to relay what you're trying, the emotion you're trying to relay to the audience, right? That's what that looked like, right? It's very like stage acting, right? Instead of camera acting. Subtle, Prime Minister. Go a little more subtle, right? Bring down the tone on the eyes like 3, because it's too much. You look a little nutso. Or as this guy says, lunatic, right? What a lunatic. Yeah, it doesn't come off as, I don't know, it just comes off as grating. Jason Kenney, what's Jason Kenney's game? Somebody said if you've got a problem with these guys hanging out on a patio after a long, hard day, presumably fighting the pandemic, then you've got other problems, I think was the generic, the feel of the tweet. And here's the Toronto Star reporting why a Sky Palace photo of Alberta Premier Jason Kenney has hit a nerve. Like, if you've had a long day, say, I used to go to industry night I used to work afternoons in children's mental health, so that means your shift is done at 11. So most people would meet, not every night, but a lot of nights you meet at the bar. We had some friends who played music, so we'd go and see them play and blah, blah, blah. But industry night is like when the people who work in bars go to the later bars and blow off steam. And they usually get cheap drinks or whatever. It's like Monday nights or Tuesday nights because those are slow nights, right? So you pick it up by offering the local people a bit of a break on the drinks, and they come and they blow off steam at your bar. If Jason Kenney gets a oh well, it's just some guys blowing off steam. How come like other people can't do that, right? Like I think that's the problem, right? And I don't know the exact specifics of Jason Kenney and the lockdowns in Alberta, but from what I've heard, it's mimicking Ontario. But here's an example of public opinion on this from the breakdown. It says, from the DMs, as of June 1st, outdoor gatherings are allowed if there's social distancing, no indoor component, and max 2 household is the goal. Unless you're the UCP caucus on the roof of the Sky Palace, then it's scotch for everyone, right? So, and then you see, right? And sure, socially distanced. Is this totally reasonable? People shouldn't be upset about this, or is this a hypocrisy from Jason Kenney and his crew? I can see how people would be upset about it, right? And this guy says it was right then when the Jason Kenney cabinet fully realized why allowing drones to spy on people is not a great idea, right? With these presumably drone pictures, but it might be telephoto, it might be somebody else in a tall building from a distance away. I don't know. I'm not sure. Okay, so the Ontario vote has an interesting, some interesting components to it. First, Gerald Butts is now talking about how terrible Doug Ford is, which is interesting considering Doug Ford and Chrystia Freeland are best buddies. He says Trudeau's done a great job at managing this whole crisis, which is alienating his base, make no mistake. But it's interesting that Gerald Butts is now targeting Ford. He says, we picked a hell of a time to elect the worst premier in Ontario history. Ford makes Mike Harris look like Bill Davies when it comes to public schools. Our kids won't get a do-over. Yeah, and we're going on, to 2 years of education disruption. Not to mention the teachers just now being told, don't advocate vaccines to your children. You could be liable and be on the hook for professional complaint. You can't do that. You cannot advocate anything to kids, medical procedures. You're not a professional in that capacity. Stop it. Doesn't matter what the ministry says. It's interesting, right? It's interesting. Darren Dunn says, your MPPs chose to adhere to an informal agreement between parties over-representing you. They knew what would happen if they abstained. Nothing other than their agreement prevented them from representing you. So they're using this as a political shield. So basically what happened for the vote to extend the emergency orders to December. The idea of extending the emergency orders to December from the government's point of view, at least from the PC point of view, and I'll show you from their own words. I'll read it from their own words. I won't try and paraphrase. I just want to explain what's happening, okay? Because it's kind of complicated, but fundamentally they're using the strategy of this agreement to shield themselves from having to go on the record as voting to continue the emergency orders because it was so politically explosive or politically an albatross. They were getting a lot of phone calls about it, blah, 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 and then they'd have to explain their vote. Now, if this explanation is accurate and they actually undo all of these restrictions, as we're seeing in Saskatchewan's saying mask mandate could be repealed with 70%. And according to Ontario numbers, 83% of people have had their first shot. So possibly 70% won't even be a problem. But Here's Rudy Cazzetto, and he says, thanks for your question. Yes to both. The vote today does not extend the lockdown until December. It will allow us to gradually and safely ease restrictions over the next couple of months, as we have been doing. And yes, we do have an informal agreement with the NDP to divide MPPs into cohorts, although it's not always honored. Because COVID, our committee meetings are now virtual and attendance in the chamber is limited. As a result, some MPPs have been able to stay in their constituents for 2 to 3 weeks and then travel to Queen's Park for 2 to 3 weeks. However, everyone is there to vote and able to do so safely. But there's some problems with these statements. First, there's a structure in place, and I asked about the smoking gun yesterday, and somebody pointed me to the document that outlines the voting, how they do it, and it's a yay lobby and a nay lobby, and an extra 30 minutes to vote. Here it says, votes recorded. When members have been called in, the speaker shall again put the question and subject to Standing Order 13. Every member present at the time who wishes to vote shall rise and record his or her vote. When a recorded division is required, members shall proceed to the members' lobbies to register their vote with the clerks. The A's shall be recorded in the East members' lobby, and the nays shall be recorded in the West members' lobby, subject to Standing Order 13. Every member shall have their votes recorded in this manner. Now, there's from people like Randy Hiller who say that the Conservatives would have felt pressure. They would have, like the individual Conservatives, if this wasn't a whipped vote, would have felt pressure, and they would have been able to defeat the emergency order, thereby ending the lockdowns and ending all of the restrictions today or June 1st or whenever the vote was. And the argument is, we agreed to this cohort thing, we agreed to these ratios, and that's why these people weren't voting. So we're down 50% of our elected representatives, and presumably in a pressure situation, those reps in a non-whipped vote would flip potentially. Who knows, right? Who knows? And so that's the argument. So I don't know if it's a valid argument, but the NDP did misrepresent. They said we were not allowed to vote, and that's not true. They were allowed to vote. They could have voted. But in this agreement thing, right? You see, it's kind of muddy. So I didn't want to give a false impression. I want to be as like clear as possible. But the NDP did misrepresent it, which I think is strange, right? I'll show you what I mean. Darren says here, the following conversations occurred the day of the vote to give Doug Ford the power to extend the emergency orders to December 2021. These conversations confirm all MPPs were legally allowed to vote, represent you, and their responses to questions of why they abstained were a manipulation of the truth. Choosing to adhere to an informal agreement with other parties is not the same as not being permitted or allowed. And this is a back and forth between Rudy Cazzetto and Catherine or Darren, right? It says this confirmed that the document Chelsea Smith shared. This is confirmed by the document that Chelsea Smith shared. So they're talking about how the voting works. Rudy says, Christy Dunn, everyone was able to vote. There was a 30-minute bell to allow all MPPs to vote safely. Voting by proxy is not allowed. So you're confirming that those that abstained had the opportunity to vote and chose not to. Yes, but again, the informal agreement, okay? And then they had their 30-minute time. I came across Sandy Shaw, NDP, Hamilton, claiming she wasn't permitted to vote, so I called on multiple MPPs to clarify who was being dishonest. So Sandy Shaw says, today all NDP members present voted against Bill 195 extending emergency powers. I wasn't permitted to vote due to COVID capacity limits, but would have added my no vote to Ford's power grab and unlimited powers without democratic checks and balances. So the reason that I said that they're using it as a shield is because they're using their fictitious no vote, like I would have voted no if I could have, as a political carrot, like, oh man, we should be in power because I voted no for this awful bill, even though it doesn't matter, right? But she didn't vote no, right? So it's claiming a victory where there was none. It's claiming a false thing. It didn't exist, right? That no vote doesn't exist. The party voted no, and maybe if she could clarify that the party voted no in a ratio that was agreed upon, right? But that's hard to explain, but it should be explained, right? And where is this informal agreement? Is it written down somewhere? Can we see it? I haven't seen the informal agreement, because usually agreements like that are, you gotta be pretty clear with your legalese, like a union contract. It gets negotiated all the time, right? And if you say, oh, well, we'll figure that out later. No, you don't. Nope. That's not how it works, right? Like, because you're talking about workers. And if you find something that needs to be figured out later, then you add like an article or an appendix. Like Appendix 1 deals with this, really wonky situation where a coworker had X happen and then Y happened and the union contract said this, but we have to deal with it this way, blah, blah, blah. So like, it's not like, oh yeah, well, we just agreed that we were going to have ratios. Like, it doesn't quite work like that. And this needs to be understood, and it's not well understood. Okay. So, and so the NDP are claiming that they're voting no, but not exactly, right? I began receiving responses. So he's going through trying to figure out what they're talking about. And somebody, she was sending a response that led me to an article to confirm the voting restrictions without realizing I'd find the truth there. And it says, the article shows, we're definitely and wholeheartedly willing to discuss further safety measures, but we're not interested in stripping MPPs of their right to vote, Sattler said. The NDP said that additional members would not enter the legislature for question period or debates, but would only show up to cast their votes, something Minister Calandra stressed was important for members to do during the early days of the pandemic. You see, you need to have these things hammered out in like a legal kind of document, like an agreement that everybody agrees to and then votes on. You can't just make this kind of thing up on the fly. It doesn't work, because then stuff like this happens, right? And it's kind of a bait and switch. And it's like, oh, well, we weren't allowed to vote because of this agreement that everybody agreed on, but except the agreement said something else. Oh, and we all kind of forgot. Huh. Yeah, right? So they'll show up for the votes, but they didn't, right? Stress was important for members to do during the early days of the pandemic. Quote, what we've done is created a system that will allow all the members of this legislature to come in and vote on bills by creating a yay lobby and a nay lobby for voting in much the same way that the mother parliament does in the United Kingdom, and staggering votes over a half-hour time period, Calandra said Monday. So I quoted the NDP, says the additional members, from the article, and shortly after, she deleted most of her comments. Right? And then she says, I deleted them because the whip responded. And I've spent too much time on this already, but you understand what I'm getting at here, right? And there's a problem as well with this thing that I read. There's more to this, and I don't want to misrepresent it, but hold on, let me see if I can encapsulate what I got wrong. What I got wrong is actually what I was explaining for the whole article. John Van Thoff says, your statement that all members were able to vote because of the 30-minute bell was not really accurate, since all members are not at Queen's Park because of the cohorts. People who do not see or do not read the whole screenshot don't have accurate info. I agree, says Rudy. Sorry for confusion. I did explain that above and below. Rudy did not originally explain it, and it wasn't omitted from the screenshot. And you can see the original screenshot for the whole conversation. And then he argues about omitting it. So, since the result of the vote, many NDP members have publicly stated that they would have voted no, but didn't. Judith, and he lists the people who have done that, if they had chosen to not adhere to their informal agreement with the other parties that isn't always honored, and instead chose to represent their constituents, there would have been a majority vote for no. It seems that they all wanted to extend until December, but this approach enables the NDP to point back to this claim that they were against the idea, but unable to vote without upsetting their parties. I've screenshotted most of the MPPs pushing the idea that they were unable to vote, and it's simply not true. At the end of the day, they chose honoring their informal agreement over representing their constituents. Okay? Very interesting stuff. I think that it's notable, and it seems kind of wonky and hard to understand, but I think that's the kind of thing that is a slippery slope to losing our democracy, these informal agreements, these things that, oh, well, you mean well, and I mean well, and we all mean well, except that they forget that humans have amnesia, right? Did we say we were going to not be there we were going to vote in cohorts, or did we just say we were going to debate in cohorts? Oh, I don't know. Just let those guys vote, and we'll just say we were going to vote no, but we couldn't because of COVID. Making things up, rewriting the rules in the press, and it's not appropriate. We demand better. Like, these are the leaders. These are the leaders of our province, right? And they're supposed to be charting the way out of this, and they can't figure out how to vote in an emergency. Like, should we extend this emergency declaration to December? Yeah, okay. Well, how are we going to vote? Oh, well, I don't know. Let's make it up as we go along. All right, sounds good. Like, you're going to stay home? I'm going to stay home too. Okay. What? Okay, Anthony Fury. Moving into schools. We had a pool party, as I said. Anthony Fury says, we are doing as well as a province could do, Doug Ford said, as every single other province and state in North America is doing better than Ontario. Yeah. Doug Ford's not doing so well. And it's interesting. Did you see there's two things. The Simpsons protest is happening, and people are changing their avatars to Simpsons characters. And somebody started, I think the Fissman group, the TV doctor group, started using Arthur, although I only saw one or two Arthur characters, but they started using Arthur characters to combat the Simpsons characters. So watch for an onslaught of Arthur character bots coming into Ontario conversations about COVID-19. But I think that it's very interesting. Matt Strauss says, a child's right to an education is enumerated in Article 26 of the UN Declaration for Human Rights, to which Canada is a signatory. The Ontario government is literally violating the human rights of children with no scientific grounds. Shame on us all. Yeah, there's a lot of parents who I've heard have checked out of online school. The online school is happening, but they're not, I don't know that they're going to classes or the meets that they were like they were in September. And they've said, yeah, it's so much stress on my kid. I'm just not going to subject them to the pressure of this. Like, why? Why would I do that to my kid? It seems like it's hurting them. So I'm not going to hurt them anymore. It's very easy, right? It's very simple. And that's an interesting situation to be in, because the Ontario government is saying, well, we're providing online education, which isn't tested. Doesn't show that the kids learn better than or retain any material similar to in class, right? But that's the argument. We're providing an education through internet, and sorry about your luck. But is that a good enough argument? Is that like let's take the model and just put it into like a foreign country, right? Any African country, or even like a European country, right? We're stopping school and we're putting it online, and now your education is online. We haven't tested it, and it goes K to 12, and your rights are satisfied by this. Would that satisfy you if you were a casual observer looking in, instead of being subject to it, like just to take your emotions out of it? If you were to look at that and evaluate that policy as some other country doing it, do you think you would be like, that's great? Or do you think, that's probably not a great idea? Especially if the context of, no trials, no nothing. We're just doing it. We're doing it, and we're doing it right now. And there's no pathway back. Sorry about your luck. Yeah? No? I don't know. I think no. I think I would be outraged for the children. And I would say, like, where's the legal battle? Arthur. This is why I was telling you about the Arthur Simpsons thing. There's this story about Arthur. And Doug Ford gets a letter in his mailbox, goes over to these people's houses. Isn't there a stay-at-home order, Doug Ford? Has a little barbecue, meets them up, they're having dinner. He's like, hey, I'm Doug Ford. You heard there's a stay-at-home order? I'm just going to hang out in your backyard barbecue with you. And this Arthur kid tells him that he wants to see his friends and have a graduation day, and Doug Ford makes a snap decision to ignore most of the medical literature and organizations and societies in Ontario, and listens to this Arthur kid. And then today the Arthur protest pops up. Okay, I'm going to cue this up because the Arthur thing is interesting. All right, here we go.
English on the other side for me. So I went over and I knocked on the door, and this little guy comes out, and I said, "Are you Arthur?" And he said, "No, I'm Marcus." I said, "Is your mom home?" And he said, "No, they're out in the back having dinner. Come with me." He was great. He was like a little butler. He put this mask on. I had my mask on. And so we went in the backyard, the nicest family you could ever meet. And it was so difficult. So I met Arthur. And I'll tell you, he's going to be the future premier. I sat and asked him, I said, "Arthur, this is the situation. I'm going to bring it to cabinet." I was very upfront with him. But I'm really concerned about putting all the kids in the classroom. If there was a choice, do you want to go back to class, or do you want to, I said, are you going to camp? He goes, "Yeah, I'm going to camp." I said, "Well, I'm just concerned about that. Which one would you want?" He goes, "Well, I want to go back to class." So after going back and forth, he was a tough negotiator, by the way. I got to get him into some of the negotiations. But at the end, he said, "I'd be happy if we had a graduation day, and that's for all grades, not just grade 8 and 12, and get to see his friends, and then he gets to go to camp, and he has a great summer." So what a great.
So my question is,
house, and I didn't.
Did Doug Ford threaten Arthur and say, you can either have school or camp? And Arthur was like, well, I'll take camp, I guess. Because that's a different conversation, right? Like, what do the negotiations look like here, Doug? I don't know, man. I don't know. It seems dicey to me, this Arthur story, and also the Arthur protest that's now popped up. Watch for your Arthur avatars across social media. I think honestly, it is just like, Okay. Regina says, I'm baffled by the claim that if Ontario kids go to school for 2 or 3 weeks, all programs fighting COVID will be lost. Schools are open in BC, Quebec, and most U.S. states. And as vaccinations increase, cases are falling fast. Why would we expect a dramatically different outcome in Ontario? You got me. Doug Ford wants an outdoor celebration for every grade. Not so fast, said school boards. Shocking, right? Like, not that shocking, because I've heard as well that the school boards were saying that they were ready to go back to class when Doug Ford announced that, we're not going back to class. I believe that. I heard that from a bunch of teacher friends. My sister was saying everybody's been notified they better get their stuff together to go back to class, blah, 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 blah. And some teacher friends of mine, I saw posts of theirs that said the same. So I thought it's interesting because they probably were ready to go back to class. But Arthur, man, jeepers creepers. An outdoor celebration for every grade. The school board's not ready to do that, but they were ready to go back to class. Is it the union? Is it the school boards? I don't know. I have no idea. Ontario children have been out of school longer than any other province in Canada, impacting not only their learning, but their physical and mental health. We must act now to prioritize children in our pandemic recovery. Read our full statement at #KidsInCrisis. This is Children's Hospital of London Health Services, CMHO. And, I guess this is a joint letter, a Children's Health Coalition statement. And this was released yesterday. As leaders in children's health, we are deeply disappointed that Ontario has not acted upon the broad consensus for a regional reopening of an in-person learning. The consensus included children's healthcare, public health, scientific experts, and teachers' organizations. Throughout the pandemic, children and youth have made enormous sacrifices from missing school to the delays of surgery and treatment. To date, there has been inadequate attention to their needs. For many kids, the decisions by government will impact their learning, development, physical and mental health, and not only now, but for years to come. Ontario needs a coordinated recovery plan where kids are the priority and health equity is the guiding principle. We know children from low-income families, children who are Black, Indigenous, and racialized, and children with disabilities are even more profoundly impacted by the pandemic. Can we not just say that all Canadian children are terribly impacted by the disastrous, buffoonish plan that Doug Ford is currently running? It's terrible. It's terrible. And whether it's purposeful or not, it's terrible. Andrea Horvath, I don't agree with Andrea Horvath, but she says, Ontario is the only province with schools still closed because Doug Ford didn't want to spend the money on smaller classes, better ventilation, and testing. Parents and kids are struggling. This government needs to make the investment so schools can be reopened safely. I think that's a snaky argument, right? Like it's a very misrepresenting why the schools aren't open. Do BC schools have better ventilation or smaller class sizes or more testing? Right? Are there other places that have examples of this proposed solution that Mr. Horvath is suggesting? Because I don't think so. I think that there are places around the world, and Ontario is one of the only places that has their kids still out of school. And it's not because other places are testing, and it's not because other places are ahead on vaccines, and it's not because of smaller class sizes, right? The UK's, they don't have ventilation in their classrooms, right? It's not the same HVAC systems that we've got here, right? Like, it's a totally different system. They don't compare apples to apples. It's a very different system. So it's very frustrating. Alex Pearson says, how can the Premier say he's so worried about kids' well-being but ignores the well-documented mental health issues? Great question. Great question. This is Bright Light News, and they published a letter. It says, retirement home PSW breaks silence on senior abuse and COVID-19 vaccine rollout, injuries, and outbreak. So this is a letter from somebody who worked in a retirement home, and she outlines her experience, firsthand experience. So this is firsthand experience, anecdotal story, but still important. The way society treats its children and the way society treats its elderly is instructive, I think, of who the society is. And right now, man, I would if I was an armchair quarterback looking in and judging our society by how we treat our children and how we treat our elderly, I wouldn't have much patience for us currently, right? Anyway, weekly church services were canceled, which many residents attended. Personal one-on-one visits from various members of the church stopped. Many have televisions, not all, and could choose to watch a service in this manner. However, there is no comparison between this and an in-person service. The residents' spiritual needs ceased to be fulfilled in whole or in part. Weekly hairdressers were restricted from entering the premises. Many of our female residents had regularly scheduled appointments, which they enjoyed and looked forward to. For them, it was an important and necessary part of their life. I saw a decline in their self-esteem and self-worth. Foot care providers were restricted from entry. Also, to be without proper and necessary foot care for many, many months is downright abuse and neglect. The condition of many of our residents' feet and toenails is atrocious, which could lead to health issues, especially among diabetics. Activities in the home were stopped as the activities directors were not permitted to continue them. I saw a decline in the residents' cognitive function, physical capabilities, as well as loss of social interaction. Dining room seating was altered to ensure residents were spaced at least 6 feet from one another. Staff were informed that face masks were to be worn in the workplace. Cloth and homemade masks were not allowed, even though a local women's group had kindly sewed and generously donated a large bag of masks for the staff. Only the blue medical masks were permitted. The masks made it difficult for some of the residents to hear and understand us. That by itself, like I hear pretty okay. Like my hearing is that of a person who had a Walkman in the 90s, right? So not as great as it could be, but not as bad as it could be. And I find masks just terrible. I'm like, I can't hear people like 3-4 feet away. I'm like, what'd you say? Can you take I can't. Even watching people's noses gives an indication of kind of what they're saying. Like it is very, very disruptive and polarizing. Polarizing is the wrong word. There's something about the mask that is more than dehumanizing. It cuts off our communication. We share a lot, right? Like resting bitch face, people whose resting face is like angry, right? You walk through a mall, you can gauge the situation you're in pretty well. You walk into a store and somebody's walking in with a mask and a hoodie up, and you're like, where am I? What's gonna happen next? It's a very different situation. We're terrorizing ourselves, right? There's more to it. It's very, very, very insidious, but it cuts off our communication, and I don't like it either. Back to this. If at any time, for any reason, including scheduled appointments, a resident had gone to the hospital and was there for more than 48 hours, they were required to undergo testing and provide the retirement home, with a copy of a negative PCR test for COVID-19. Imagine not being able to return to your own home unless you consent to an invasive medical procedure. During this 1-year period, there was no widespread illness among the residents, nor was there an outbreak. On March 5th, 2021, 44 residents received their first injection of the COVID-19 vaccine, Pfizer. Later that evening, the first of many side effects and adverse reactions began to occur. The list of side effects and of adverse reactions steadily grew as the days passed. Over time, the vast majority of residents were affected in one way or another. It differed in what each resident became afflicted with, the onset, the severity, and the duration. Phone calls to 911 were made, and some residents transported to hospital via ambulance for assessment and or admittance. Within 5 weeks of the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine being given, public health declared the retirement home to be in an outbreak. Coincidence? Remember, during the 1-year period prior to the vaccine, there was no widespread illness among the residents. All residents were now to be confined to their suites in isolation. The small group of family members who were once permitted to visit were now barred from entering the building. Staff were now instructed to don gloves, face masks, and face shields and isolation gowns. Residents now had more difficulty discerning who each staff member was, and I'm sure staff appeared frightening to some. Meals were delivered to their suites, often cold by the time they were delivered. Prior to the residents being isolated, staff were able to monitor them in the dining room. Now they are alone in their suites. A resident could choke, and staff would not be aware until meal trays were collected. Staff are not with them to prompt or encourage them to eat. Many meals were left untouched or barely eaten. I've witnessed the residents experience increasing depression, anxiety, anger, agitation, sadness, hopelessness, failure to thrive, feelings of abandonment, calling out for their loved ones and wondering where they are and why they don't come to visit. Some have telephones to keep in touch, but not all. And there's more. I mean, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking what's going on. And so when we treat our society like that, no wonder there's hopelessness. No wonder there's this feeling of despair, right? Businesses can't work like this. So I think the UK, they're extending their June 21st reopening. They were supposed to reopen June 21st. when you keep changing the rules, when you keep dangling a carrot and saying you can reopen now, and oh no you can't, oh you can reopen now, no you can't, right? Businesses, it costs money to get business up and rolling. It costs time, energy, patience. Time getting set up for a business is time that you're not looking for another job because you've given it up on your business, right? And so this is like a wedding planner is upset about this, but and the wedding industry I think is this one, but hold on, maybe not. Hold on. Yeah, this was weddings. Businesses can't work like this, says Bernie's tweets. They can't plan cash, stock, staff, running costs. What about weddings and events? It's okay when you're working from home on full pay. What's a couple more weeks? It's almost as if MPs don't have a clue how businesses work. And I saw another wedding photographer who was impacted by the same thing, and they had 4 weddings canceled because of the potential change in opening dates. I think this was in Ontario because the parks they were using were canceled or something like that. Just wild. We had campgrounds scheduled between June 3rd and June 7th that were canceled now because they just decided it's not opening on June 3rd. It's opening on June 7th or 8th, right? And anything up until the 8th. And they can't guarantee that it won't be extended again, like that the cancellation won't be extended again. You can't run a business like that. That's wild. Somebody was asking me yesterday, they messaged me, and I shared this with them as well, about what I know about the lumber shortage. I'm reporting to you what I hear. And some of it is based in fact, and I do my best to verify if I can verify. If I can't verify, I try and let you know that I can't verify it. But I've seen pictures like this in Irving, of Irving yards with lumber as well. I think this one's in Florida. This is Merritt Island community, excuse me. It says, I'm sure by now you've heard all about the lumber shortage, looking like just another manufactured crisis to drive up prices. These are pictures from Port Carnival areas. These pictures do not do justice for all the lumber being held there. Have to drive by to really see this. The lumberyard docked by Victory Gaming Shipyard is full. The lot behind CBP is full. The RORO lot next to Cruise Terminal is full. I've never seen so much lumber being stored at the port ever. I cannot ever guess how many acres of lumber are out there. Would love to have drone footage to expose this manufactured crisis. Anyone know any reputable news reporters that would investigate why all this lumber is stored there while prices skyrocket? So I'm just bringing to you what I see. This kind of stuff seems important to mention, right? It seems like there's more than meets the eye, but I don't have that final piece, right? And if I did, I'd let you know. If I did, I would definitely let you know. K4C is saying, if you think times are about to get better, look at these prices again. Okay, this is for a pound of sterling silver ribeye grilling steak for 1 pound, $18.99. Okay, that's very expensive for a pound of beef. Here is another example: PC freeform boneless rib steak, $23.98 a pound. Right? That's it's not cheap. It's not cheap. It isn't. Okay, the Delta variant. Unlike the original strain, we know that some of the new COVID-19 variants we were fighting are more dangerous for children. Could you cite something like that says that, Doug? No? Please? No one wants kids back in school more than I do, but as premier, these aren't risks I'm willing to take. It's interesting. He's invoking the school stuff. And I say again, like, show us some data. I don't think it exists. I really don't. My skepticism is shining through. I showed you yesterday that they had come up with, Dr. Tam had come up with a compensation for vaccine injury. And I didn't expand the compensation tab. And this is what you see when you expand the compensation tab. What type of financial support payments will the VISP provide? Eligible individuals may receive income replacement indemnities, injury indemnities, death benefits, coverage for funeral expenses, reimbursement of eligible costs such as otherwise uncovered medical expenses. Right? Funeral expenses are covered, so yay. Yikes. The problem here is, though, they can set the bar so high that nobody qualifies, right? Like, oh, well, you tick 2 of the boxes, but this third box here, and if you didn't have the third box, if the third box doesn't apply to you, then you don't get the benefits, right? Sorry. No benefits paid out. I'd be interested to see after 2 years how much in dollars that this program pays out. Just because, the history of vaccine injury in Canada has not needed anything like this up until now. So interesting. PEI government announced the bubble will open for folks with shots June 27th, punishing and oppressing people who decline shots, just so you know what's coming your way. Just in case you weren't sure, yes, they're absolutely making a medical apartheid state with vaccinated people getting preferential treatment over unvaccinated people. Are you ready? Brave new world, everyone. You thought you lived in a free country? Ho, ho, ho. Only if you're vaccinated. Right? Laura Stone says official guidance from Ontario for those who got AstraZeneca. As of tomorrow, Ontarians who received the first dose of AstraZeneca can choose to receive a second dose of AstraZeneca vaccine or an mRNA Pfizer or Moderna vaccine for their second dose. Second doses will be provided at the recommended 12-week interval. So now they're going back to the regular dosing schedule. Do we have any kind of good data from any of the crazy experiments we've done? Are we following these people? Have we marked them? 4-month interval, no second shot, 12-week interval, second shot at the proper dosing schedule, right? Like, have we attached the proper labels to these people to make sure that we can actually have some usable data after all of this goes sideways? Second doses will be provided at the recommended 12 weeks. People who got AstraZeneca and want a second shot of AstraZeneca can book through a pharmacy or a doctor, can also book Pfizer or Moderna at pharmacy. Starting June 7th, people can also register for a second dose of mRNA on provincial booking site. There will be a second dose only option on the provincial booking site for those who got AstraZeneca and want an mRNA for their second shot. They can also book directly through public health units that have their own systems. This is in response to the recent NACI guidance on mixing vaccines. You know, I don't know why anybody would question our medical professionals and medical health, public health, etc. Why would they question them? Oh, well, here's a long list. Okay. RCMP played a clear and unavoidable role in Canada's residential schools tragedy. Okay. I just wanted to highlight that this is another one that talks about the remains were found using ground-penetrating radar. And I wanted to show you just this brief limitations of ground-penetrating radar. Now, he's talking about finding pipes. Okay, I want to make that distinction clear. He's talking about identifying like a gas pipe versus a communications pipe or cable or something like that. That's what he's talking about. I think that it extrapolates pretty well to ground radar. But the reason I mean, the RCMP, it says, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police played a clear and unavoidable role in the tragedy of residential schools in Canada, the country's public safety minister said. Bill Blair made the comments during a meeting on the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security Wednesday afternoon. The minister also acknowledged the role of government in which we all serve. Self-flagellation before the thing is proved. I think that if they want to make this claim and make this the genocide that they're it feels like celebrating in the news. It really feels like they're like, oh man, we're so terrible. Look at how terrible we are. Right. And it's like, yeah, it's a very, very odd thing. I think before we uncork the champagne, for lack of a better term, we maybe verify what we think we found, because if it's up to the interpretation, and here is a ground geophysical, this guy does videos about ground radar, right? Ground penetrating radar. So this is just a quick video about limitations of it. And this is what he's talking about. So I'll give you this to give you context about what I'm talking about. Here we go.
Are some indicators, right? There are some differences in the responses of those, but it takes some training and some experience to be able to have higher probabilities on your guesses than if you don't go through some serious training and don't have experience. So it really doesn't tell you exactly what's going on. Context is very important, and it can give you a lot of information about the possibilities of what you're identifying, but it doesn't give you the actual target, right? The exact target. You have to come up with the interpretations of what you think is going on, and a lot of that comes down to training. Okay, a lot of that comes down to proper training. If you're not trained properly, you're going to misidentify more often than not. The third limitation, all right?
And I'll leave that there. You can check that out.
Third limitation I went over at this
hold on a second. Goodness.
Was
lost my mouse. Sorry, I have three screens across two computers. Sometimes the mouse jumps around. Anyway, apologies. I have questions. How well trained were the people who were doing these photo radar or this ground radar? Right? Like how well trained? What were their interpretations? Could we see the ground radar that has solicited this this statement from Bill Blair, right? Like the role of the government in which we all serve in this tragedy, unclear and avoidable role in this tragedy. Did anybody dig anything up? Anybody planning to dig anything up? Or are we just going to, and an interesting aside here, no cooperation, no comment, right? From missionary oblates who ran Kamloops school, won't release records. So it seems like, again, more than meets the eye on this story. And I think that is interesting. I think that's interesting. It's interesting to note because, like, what the heck's going on? When the government says this clearly backs up our narrative and the narrative of we're terrible, like we're awful, terrible, terrible, awful, genocidal people, and it backs it up, and you people are terrible, and then refuses to like give you any real digging in to this is why we think this. This is what we found. More than like photo radar. Color me skeptical. I don't know, man. I don't know. Here's Joe Biden talking about selling soap and ads on the TV, and I don't know what the heck he's talking about. This bends us back to China, and I think when China sees a weak leader, they start talking about nuclear war. And I think in Biden they see a weak leader. Here's Joe Biden going off script a little bit, I guess. And well, I'll leave you. We'll do this, and then I'll do the end of the show and blah blah blah. Here we go.
I challenge you. Find today, when you turn on the stations, sit on one station for 2 hours, and I don't know how many commercials you'll see. Lay 8 to 5. 2 to 3 out of 5 have mixed race couples in them. That's not by accident. They're selling soap, man. Not a joke. Remember old Backcatalog used to say, you want to know what's happening in American culture? Watch advertising. Because they want to sell what they have. We have hope. I challenge you.
So my interpretation of what he's saying is Americans are tolerant and have mixed race couples, and they're selling soap to those people. And so I'm not sure of the point really he was trying to make. Like they're selling to the mixed race couples, and so there are a lot of mixed race couples. I'm not sure, but the people thought he was joking and laughed. They didn't know what to do with it. And then he says, "No, it's not a joke." Okay, so it's a very interesting situation to have the president of the United States seemingly not able to articulate something clearly. Like anytime you're the president and you're speaking to people, it's important to be clear about what you mean, right? And so it's interesting, and maybe that's taken out of context. I haven't seen the longer clip. Maybe he bends it back because you can take things out of context, right? I'm not trying to necessarily take Biden to the woodshed here, but I mean, he takes himself to the woodshed. But it's a very interesting thing when the audience responds like that, and people just, and China's threatening nuclear war, right? It's interesting. It's all interesting. It's not good. It's interesting to live through. It's not good. It's not good. I don't like it. I'd much prefer boring and a $20 billion deficit and, funny incompetence over, nuclear war drums with China. That's not good. That's not good. Funny incompetence. Okay, we can deal with that. The other one, not so good. Okay. That's enough out of me. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out CanadaPoly.com. Check out CanadaReport.co. Check out SpeakingMoistly.co. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.